Okay, good evening. We're going to go ahead and convene our special board meeting today. We'll start with roll call. Trustee Grist? Here. Trustee Martinez? Here. Trustee Tosti? Here. Trustee Marks? Here. Trustee Torres de Luna? Here. And does anyone want to go ahead and help us with the flag salute?
Ready? Salute. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I have a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. Do we have any public comments for closed session?
No.
Okay. Do we have a motion to convene to closed session?
I'll make a motion to convene the closed session.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. Closed session. Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and continue with our board meeting. And our next item is, we don't have any announcements from closed session. Our next item is 9, discussion and approval of second interim and fiscal stabilization plan. I think, is this a presentation by Mr. Scott Wilbur?
It is.
I have 1 second, I want to make sure that the slides we made for Trustee Martinez is available for the presentation. 1 second. I apologize.
Should we take public comment in the meantime? Cheryl, come up and give us, let me start your timer.
Okay, I'm Cheryl Rios. I'm speech therapist at Mays and have the vice president.
Go ahead. Oh, it's not on?
It's muted. If you tap the button at the bottom, it should unmute it, sorry. So that there's a green.
The blue light?
There you go.
Okay. So I wanted to talk about the proposal you're having for the second interim. And looking at your agenda, I find it interesting and a little curious that you will be discussing Superintendent Sanchez's voluntary furlough days after you talk about the second interim and the fiscal, what's it called, solvency plan or whatever it is. So I'm assuming that that reduction in your expenses is not reported in your fiscal plan, nor in the second interim, because you will not have approved it yet. Also, I want to just remind you that with her voluntary furlough days, which I do commend, that is a one-time savings. Whereas all of the other RIFs that you're doing, those are going to be long-term if those people don't find jobs. So I just wanted to give that perspective and ask why you're not talking about the furlough days for Superintendent Sanchez before you approve a plan. And I have not looked at the plan, the fiscal plan, but I am wondering, as I asked at the last meeting, do we know how far down we will take our percentage of salary to budget with all of the RIFs? I am really looking for that number because that will give the clearer picture. Thank you.
The phone calls, so when Mr. Wilbur is ready.
I'm so sorry. My fault is all my fault.
You're good. No, you're good.
I'll just go ahead and get started until the presentation comes up. I just want to show what a pleasure it is to be here. In terms of presenting the second interim budget tonight, I need to make a thank you to several people that helped make this possible. The second interim is a brand new budget built from scratch with over 3,500 1,500 lines of budgeting code that was looked at it over and over with a historical perspective, and also within a perspective of what's been spent and what is coming up as expenses. It's a solid, good budget that couldn't have been made without the help of my Bishop Associates, Laura Fan, and Gabe, my friend Gabe, who is the former CPO here. He gave us a historical perspective, and without his assistance, this would not be possible. Moving forward, we have a couple basic assumptions in the second interim going forward. It's important to note that we have a COLA that is set at this year at 507, 5%. Next year, we're building and looking at, in our projections for the second interim, a COLA of 5.3%. COLAs are important to look at because COLAs are designed to not increase your budget, but to maintain your budget's ability to purchase year through year. This COLA is a nice number, and it's wonderful to have in terms of our budget process moving forward. The challenge, though, is if you'll take a look at the bottom of the same slide, is we're also going to be having increased PERS and STIRS costs, which are also wonderful to have because those are amazing systems. But the COLA, and some of that COLA is already going to be put or need to be put in place in these models going forward. We're also looking at a number that changed in terms of our ADA. Previous interims and the original budget was looking at a much higher ADA given COVID challenges this year. Those numbers are actually our ADA numbers percentage-wise, if we took this year's number even with more students, is less than our whole harmless number. The whole harmless number was the 2019-2020 number of 5297. So that number is what we'll be using in the budget going forward. This is a challenge for us in the sense that we built the budget this year, up into the first interim, with a higher number that would equate $2 million more in revenue for our budget if you look at previous models. That's not a part of this model going forward. We were advised and guided to use these numbers and also use conservative numbers going forward to project the most base, most focused, most clear number we can moving forward in our interims and our budgeting process.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Please.
Just to make sure everybody can hear you well, do you want to, hold the mic or come closer to the mic or something?
Whatever you like.
Yeah, I'm hearing you okay, but I'm
Okay.
pretty sure people on the other side can't hear you.
Okay, is that right? Okay, wonderful. In terms of looking at then the differences in those assumptions, these are the things we use going forward. These are from the school services dartboard. This is very much similar to almost any other district or any other place in the state. If we look at our next slide, we have some changes in this second interim that are unique. And in terms of doing that, we want to make sure that we're clear about differences, and there'll be a little bit of history here. Before I get too deep in the second interim, though, I want to make sure I make a statement. I want to commend the business department here in the Hollister School District for an amazing job on that first interim. It was a very difficult process, and if you take a look at the challenges of the adopted budget that was made last year, the efforts that were put together to make the first interim for the first time looking at those numbers and some of those costs really was amazing. And as we look at the business office going forward, I want to commend them for the work that's been done thus far on the first interim and what we used to make the second interim. One thing we can look at in terms of changes is we had obviously differences from last year. We had certificated and classified hires quantified. We have over 40 people that were added to our staff, and our staff's plural in both classified and certificated. We also had a retroactive salary increase for all bargaining units. That's something we'll talk about a little bit later. We also had shifts from unrestricted to restricted funds, and much greater than we anticipated from the first interim. And that's something we'll talk about today. We also, as we just talked about with the numbers in terms of the ADA, we had a much smaller ADA number, and we also then have to adjust our revenue going forward, the amount of difference of those students. I apologize. That's my daughter. It's scary. Moving forward, in terms of looking at this, we have, if you take a look at general funds, in terms of going forward here, I want to highlight the blue line here. It is absolutely essential for us going forward to maintain fiscal solvency to have that supplemental and concentration fund of over $9 million. That's over 11% of our total budget, and if it wasn't for some heroic efforts from the district office and our school district, there was a potential potential that we might have lost those funds. If we had lost those funds, there's no way we would be able to make decisions at this point in our budgeting process going forward. Those $9 million are essential. And building going forward, there are a few things we can talk about in terms of this year's budget and what brought us here. But one of the things we have to earmark and think about for the future and maintain is making sure that we get this data so we can maintain these numbers for our students and provide the best education anywhere. If we look at also these numbers, it's important to note that we have, in looking at this example, contributions from the general fund that support programs. And specifically, we have routine restricted maintenance of about $2 million. We also have special ed contribution, which is just and right, and it comes from our general fund to the tune of about $12.5 or $12.4 million. If you take a look at our whole budget and tying this together, you'll see that sometimes, I like thinking of restricted money and unrestricted money kind of in a very childlike way. There's the money you get for your allowance, which you have the ability to spend responsibly, of course, on the things you're going to want to do. Restricted money is like the money that you get from your mom when you go down to get bread and milk. It's restricted. You get to use that money to buy bread and milk. And the change has got to come back. At least in my house it did. And so the idea of looking at restricted funds that way and unrestricted funds is something we can carry forward. We have restricted funds that are for certain outcomes and certain things that have to be met. And restricted money is something that we don't get to think of as fluid or something that easily is transferable. We had some luck with our shifts that we'll talk about in a little bit that allowed us this kind of special one-time shot in the arm, and we can talk more about that. But in terms of our general revenues going forward, in terms of our amounts, this is what our budget is going forward. Again, stressing, this budget is different in that it was rebuilt from scratch. The first adopted budget and the first interim had challenges that we've been able to address by looking at this number. Do we have the numbers? We have the numbers, which is super exciting to say. We have a graph in front of us here, and I'm not seeing the percentages, so I will share those anecdotally. If you take a look at the larger of the pie pieces there, that's unrestricted general funds. That's about 56% of our total budget. That's about $47 million. That's the money that is our allowance. Again, minus contributions and other things. And I don't want to make it sound like we're just going to spend it on gum and cookies like I did, but responsible things and the things that we do in our budget. If you take a look at then the restricted funds over there, that's going to be 31% of our overall funds this year. And that's about $25.8 million. That's that second big chunk. And then take a look at that Texas colored kind of chunk there at the bottom there. If you're all in Texas, you'll know that's the orange color. There's an orange, yes. I don't know what the right color is. I think it's Texas color.
Yeah.
If you take a look at that number there, that's actually the supplemental concentration funds. That's the $9.3 million or $9.4 million. That is a chunk of our pie that we cannot live without. And that's something to think about going forward. You've got some other things with unrestricted state revenue. You have a couple of local revenue parts of the pie. But in together, that's going to be then your total budget for the year in terms of our general fund expenditures, which is the $84 million. So this is a general fund expenditures slide, and the reason it's shared is it highlights a very important thing that we need to look at between the first interim, which was a valiant effort, and what we now know from the second interim. It's also one of the reasons why shift became such an important word for us. Given COVID funds and the restricted nature, those funds were able to be used to help with the post-COVID effects of the previous year and this year. And those funds had some restrictions, but also some abilities to move and be free with in terms of making sure we meet those needs in terms of the post-COVID world. If you take a look at that first interim budget, you're going to see that as we look across the line there, we're going to have some expenses in terms of combined general funds, certificated salaries were in this case $31,270,541. That was our target. If you go down that list, you're going to see that there's some pretty big charges in there. And with those total fund charges, we were in the first interim really told or guided that we would need to make cuts to the extent of about $3.3 million to maintain solvency going forward. And based on those targets, that was a reasonable thing to think about. In the second interim, though, if you look at the combined totals at the very end, for example, the certificated salaries number, which again is just chosen because of the number, but also in terms of the variance that we had and we discovered, is now projected in the second interim at $35,400,751. That's $4 million. And that's the difference between a system or a setup where your adopted budget, your first interim, and your second interim should all match and become a part of that story in different snapshots. We had to go through and build from scratch so that we have the right numbers. And these right numbers then are what we used or have to use to look at the differences in shift. One of the things that's come up quite a bit recently is books and supplies and numbers. If you're to take a look at this example here, we provided in the first interim an example that said that we had books and supply monies combined up to about 10 million. During the first interim, it was shared with the board and the community that monies from COVID were placed in books and supplies. It's sometimes a procedure to put monies in books and supplies, and you can use that then to place monies for things you haven't decided what to do with. If you can take a look at the amount of monies that were necessary, you're going to see about $6 to $7 million in shift from these one-time funds to cover salaries, this one-time shot in the arm with those funds that were in books and supply line items there are what saved our solvency. It's an unusual situation. It's very unusual if you take a look at some of these circumstances here in terms of hiring more folks. You're taking a look at retroactive salary increases from the previous year in this year. If you take a look at looking at the fact that you have this amount of COVID money to look at, but you also don't necessarily have systems in place to keep track of everything you're hiring and what you're putting together. And we take a look also at the ADA challenge. You're going to find a unique circumstance to where we were able to shift much of these one-time funds as a shot in the arm to get through this year. And you can see in terms of the numbers of the books and supplies where those funds came from. And that's pretty clear in terms of going forward. In looking at these differences too, it's important to note how important it is that there's oversight for these budgets over time. Without a vision of expenditures month by month and being able to track what costs are and where things are, it's very easy to make an 8% challenge in terms of mistake, in terms of projection, and throw your budget into the situation we have right now. If you turn the page or look at the next one here, these fortunately have numbers, which I'm super happy about. It shows that our second interim general fund expenditure components. If you take a look at the pie, we are a people business, and that's a great part of what we do. We serve children, and we do that with people. And if you take a look at salaries and benefits in both the unrestricted and the restricted, you're going to see where we invest our funds in people. Now, there's some transfer outs, there's some other restricted programs that we have to manage or take a look at, but you're also having to look at too in terms of other indirect costs, but that's where we spend our money.
To go back to Cheryl's comment, where it says salaries and benefits restricted and unrestricted.
Yes.
If you add the percentages up, I come up with 85.1%. So is that how does that work for the second interim?
Sure. The challenge that we have in terms of looking at traditional percentages, which is what I think the understanding the difference is that we have an inflated or a much higher budget this year given federal and state COVID funds.
Right.
Which would then skew, given the amount that was given, the overall percentage of monies that we have, both in unrestricted and restricted, percentage-wise than the people that we have in terms of salaries. So this is accurate for this year. But for next year's, pardon?
This 85%.
That is accurate. The challenge, though, is that what would that be in a normal year when COVID monies aren't available, and what those numbers are going to look like? That's something that we can look at and build for next year.
Does this 85% reflect the people that we have to let go?
This is budget, this is budgeting from this year. So it does not include anyone that is a part of the resolutions. This is for this fiscal year. This is what we spent. Now, going forward, we could budget in terms of the differences in terms of understanding what those numbers are. This is not including resolutions. This is this year.
But you're saying it's skewed because of the extraordinary one-time funds
Yes.
that was also brought in to this year. So when you're looking at that comparison and dividing your revenues and your expenditures in just this year, because of that increase in revenue because of those one-time funds, the percentage looks skewed in the sense of telling us, you know, it's at 85.1 versus, I think what we stated, 93 before. So I just want to be completely transparent as to why, if people are going to add those things up as they should, and why does the numbers still equate to what we were saying?
You said it much more eloquently than I did. Thank you.
And while are we doing questions? We're jumping in? But if we're on that topic, then, you know, at some point, it would be helpful to know once, you know, now you have this budget, you're saying these are the numbers, everybody, this is what we worked on. But I think it's important for all of us to know where are we at with that percentage, especially when we plan in May, right, with the May revise. How, you know, are we at the 90, 91, 92? Are we able to hire people more, you know, have them come back, or are we not? I think it'll be important for us to know that in the near future, where we're at once, you know, now that we're done with those resolutions.
I think that another way that we can also think about the health of our budget and our staffing going forward is looking at the overall balanced budget perspective. There is the percentage of investment in people, which is going to be high anyway because of our profession. I think there's another layer we can use for consistency, and that's to look at the balance of our expenditures over years and look at, again, what base programs are, look at how it connects with LCAP, and look at the investments that we're going to look at over time. So there are instances of districts that are 93% or 92%. It means that you have a very thin window in terms of any type of challenges, mistakes, or budgeting things that come. But yeah, that's another example that we could use too.
Okay, thank you.
So in terms of the overall, in this pie graph, or pie chart, you can see, again, where we're investing our funds and where we are this year. And I think, thank you for explaining in terms of why that number isn't going to be like it will be in other years. So it's hard to change it or compare it year to year. If we take a look at general fund ending balance, we take a look at where we are in terms of ending this year, in terms of where our reserve or our ending balance will be. You're going to see in this slide where the reserve for economic uncertainties is our 3% that we have to keep and never touch. If we were ever to activate or use or touch that, we would be in a position where we were potentially last week, where if we did make changes to help our fiscal bottom line, we wouldn't be able to operate and make decisions for ourselves going forward. Going also forward there, you have about 2.5 million going forward to help with future deficits. You'll see later that we do have a deficit scheduled for next year. If everything was perfect, it would be this amount. We need to keep a reserve beyond the 3% for any of those incidentals that are going to come. Given the variance that you've seen here between the first and second interim, that's about an 8% variance. It's very easy to have a 1 or 2 or 3% variance, and you're close to $2 million. Not that we would do that, or going forward we would be even more careful, but we have to consider going forward what the amount is in terms of our reserve beyond the economic uncertainty reserve. And then we have to also relearn how it is that we are going to budget, support staff, students, and programs, and things going forward. Very important. So in terms of looking at that, the next slide is we have in front of you a multi-year projection of unrestricted general funds. Now, as it was clearly shared earlier, is we have two budgets: the reserve, which is the milk and the cheese and what we're told, or what we are encouraged, and what we need to spend our money on. This money is set aside for these things. And then we live, though, as a school district in the unrestricted. The unrestricted is a majority of our funds. In a non-COVID year, it's even more so. And we have to use our funds with the best fiduciary responsibility we can to support the things that we do. In looking at this going forward, we have a deficit in this spending year of about $4.5 million. That's not red there in that first column. If everything goes according to the resolutions and the plan, and inflation is set and the COLAs come through like we said, and we have consistency in terms of our financial models, we project a small deficit of $628,000 in year 2, which again then becomes important to look at the reserve you have from the previous year to cover those extra costs going forward, because there is a deficit to look at here, and that's with the resolutions in place. We couldn't make this projection earlier because we didn't have the understanding of what it is that the district was going to do with regards to resolutions and reductions. With reductions, that's where we are. Going forward into a year 3, we should have a small surplus of about $213,000, along with a reserve left over that would also cover any of those other incidentals and things going forward. Taking a look at this all together in terms of a plan, this is a very positive, or this would mean we would self-certify as a positive budget. Not qualified, but positive. That doesn't mean every year is positive. It's a very small, quibbling, probably thing to say, but I want to make sure I make that really clear, is that positive qualification means you can meet your responsibilities for 3 years, even if there is some deficits, as long as coming out of it, you are fiscally solid. And that's the difference between a positive self-certification versus positive every year going forward. Yes.
So 2 questions. So positive, just for those of us who don't use this terminology every day, is better than the qualified certification that we had the other day, right?
100%.
Okay, and then, let me look up here. So with the projections that you're saying, this is based on the ADA enrollment that you showed us on the first slide, which is a conservative, safe number.
Yes.
And the projected 2022-23 is including the resolutions. So that's assuming those staff did not return. And those projections also don't include the May revise of we don't know what's going to happen. So just so that, we're understanding what all that includes, and it could be different in May depending on money and what we decide to do, correct?
And what you shared is accurate.
Okay.
We are right now, given the knowledge and the understanding we have on March 14th, knowing everything from school services and the dartboard and the LCF calculator for funding next year, we're assuming the governor's COLA is in fact something we can rely on. We don't know what the budget's going to be though until May or June. So what we're doing is taking every bit of information we have, looking at all the projections now that we have them, and making a decision or a target for us to look at. There are different things that could happen, but I'm not anticipating something happening like happened earlier this year, where we had these numerous challenges caused partially because the adopted budget wasn't accurate, and the first interim doing its best to try to figure out what that is. So yes,
Okay.
but I want to make sure I don't simplify it so much that we don't also take some of the variables that could happen.
Thank you.
Definitely. Going forward, in terms of looking at budgets, this is, I was really thankful that Ann stopped by today. We've been spending most of our focus on the unrestricted general fund, because that's where districts live. That's where the decisions are made that affect solvency. But we also took the time to look at our nutrition, our bonds, and also our developer fees. And these numbers are pretty accurate. We projected higher, I think, developer fees this year, and we haven't seen that. But this is adjusted with the latest numbers that we have. And also includes, a few different variables that could happen with food services, depending on the truck and different times. But these are right now a good set of numbers that we can look at going forward and reflect some differences. These are also really well-run programs, and this isn't something that I'm concerned about right now. At the same time, it's important to share. It's also part of the report. Fiscal Stabilization Plan results. We looked at resolutions. We made resolutions because of the information I just shared with you in terms of having those numbers only really a few days ago, or maybe less than a week ago. And having those numbers then informs choices that we've done to make sure that we're fiscally stable. The reason we did that is we identified significant amounts of shifts that were necessary, much more than we thought. We originally thought it'd be 2.7 of shifts in money from unrestricted to restricted. We ended up moving almost $6 million. And with that shift, along with the resolutions, you have the 3-year projections that we've shared today. Looking at this going forward, and it's important to look at that, is the challenges that occurred this year. We went over a little bit. We had ongoing salary increases and a retro. We also had a retro that was paid from the previous year. We had a retro that was paid but not accounted for in some of these reports. We had to dig through and find that. So a portion of the overage is not having that accounted in these models. So it really goes back again to having clear oversight and responsibility, not just in the day-to-day, which is important, but also understanding how these decisions and expenditures and revenues look over time. And the history of all those things is those moves in between that balance the budget and the expenses and recognizes before things get too out of whack what the challenge is, why we're spending what we're spending, what we need to do to balance that, what decisions we should make. And that's the other piece in terms of looking at this too, is that we had expenses from the opening of Rancho Santana, which again, that's fact, school. But there were costs involved with that account for. If you take a look also too, there's 40 plus people that were hired and classified employees that were added to the district, some of them, many of them on unsustainable one-time federal funds. And we also use federal funds for the shift. So that is an option, something to look at too, is that they were restricted funds. We have the ability to look at some of those things, but we don't have the same ability to look at those again. It's important to go forward thinking that the one-time shifts were one time. There's other things that we have to do to use those funds, if there's any, or whatever is left in them. It's really important to also look at that those decisions were made legally, acceptably, the right way. That's not open to us again. So that's an important part of this fiscal stabilization plan. So to look at this too, the second interim report shows multi-year fiscal solvency and budget independence with $6 million in budgetary reductions. It was a decrease of 59.55 full-time certificated and classified positions. It eliminates the deficit in year 3, as we've shown, and gives us a positive second interim budget certification. Qualified means you have to make changes to make your 3-year target. We've identified those changes. We, as a district, made those decisions going forward, and that gives us the right to make other decisions down the line. So that's where that goes in terms of stabilization plan. The other thing in terms of we've got work to do, and this is, I was really excited to hear some of the questions earlier today. And in saying that is that this interim is the snapshot. It's the way to look at what we've done and how much we spent up to really the end of February. And what we're going to look at going forward is start looking at projecting and maintaining that budget, making sure it's set and clear. But we also have the other exciting task of making next year's budget and looking at making sure that that budget is something that's accurate, that it is sustainable, and that we can use going forward So our first interim is a reflection of that budget, and that's an exciting thing to look at. So we have the LCAP to look at also, budget development and preparation coming between now and May. We have the governor's May revise, which is where or revisions, where we kind of look at where he thinks the numbers are going to be. We also have the legislature to look at in terms of their decisions. We should have some sort of understanding with our LCAP and budget and public hearings and adoptions in June. And then we will then transition from this budget into a new budget and maintaining that through the year. And it's essential that we have that clarity and transparency in our purchases, expenditures, and revenues, and all those things going forward. So with that, I open it up to questions.
Do you all want to do popcorn style or take turns? I got my notes here too.
Well,
Just, okay, just go ahead, okay.
I guess my biggest question is, when we get the May revise, how does that affect, the people? Do you see it changing and possibly we being able to rehire anyone, or how do you think that? I know you don't have a crystal ball, so I don't want to put you on the spot. And that's not fair to you. But I guess I'm asking is, for our people that have been laid off, do you see anywhere that things may change? Like, let's say the governor, picks up the furs and stirs, like some say, they change our ADA to enrollment instead of what we're doing now. Some things that might really change our budget dramatically, but it hasn't been approved though. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, how do you see any changes?
I think that's a two-part question.
Okay.
And again, in saying that, I think my first job, the best job I had was being a teacher. So I'm going to try to go back to what I know before I jump into what it is we're talking about. I think an important question isn't just the budget in terms of what comes to us, but I think equally important, what is our plan? What is it that we want to sustain as our base program? I think monies and funding is going to come, as it always does at different times and different levels and in different amounts. The question about the finances and us using that for something this or something there, I think an as good a question, but something that we can actually be really proactive in doing and do something about is, what is the plan? What is it that we sustain? What is it that we want to sustain? What are the things that we think we need to do? And then we need to make sure it's built into this process.
Or our priorities of what we want to do.
Well,
First, second, third.
Exactly, and I think that there's a really neat mantra that I use, and again, it goes back to bread or getting chewing gum on the side and not getting caught and all those good things that we do as kids. Is what do we need? What do we want? And what can we afford? And I think the question of the affording pieces might come in some budgets, but what's interesting is that budgets, as we've seen in the last 15 years, have gone up and changed, and then no one has ever seen the COVID money coming like that. That I, in all my years, would never
Nobody
have thought
saw
that was
COVID coming.
There you go. And so in that post-COVID world that we're building into, the plans we make to sustain the needs of our children, our community, have to be, I think, as important as whatever the state is going to then invest in us that's restricted, and what is it we get to choose in terms of locally what we want to tie into. And then that's supplemental concentration money becomes super important, because that little sliver becomes something that allows us to sustain things too. So I hope the budget's better, but I think going through this process for the last 5 weeks and reading the story, what's more important is we have our plan, and we look at staffing, and we look at ratios, and we look at sustainability, because it's what's best for our kids, it's what's best for our families, it's what's best for our partners.
Can I jump in on your question or your comment? I think it's going to be important for us that you provide us information. For example, we could easily, because we have been saying what we want, what we think. No problem. That's not the problem, right? I think what we're going to need from you is, how much money does this cost if, for example, I've been sitting a lot with, the social workers and mental health staff that were put in the resolution. If that was, because that's directly tied to our LCAP, school to prison pipeline, all these things we say that we want and need. But how much money is it gonna cost? We need you to tell us, look, it's gonna cost, X amount. I don't know what that dollar amount is. And then is it sustainable, right? I think, learning lessons. Those are those learning lessons for me as a board member of like, yeah, I would love to have A, B, and C, PE teachers, social emotional, custodians. Can we afford it? How much does it cost? How many can we afford? How many can we put here? I think those are where we need to, you need to help us with that dollar amount. And then also, as we get, if you can talk a little bit about the plan from here to May, timeline. I'm a timeline person. You ask my family, friends, I need to know where we're going, how, in advance, where we staying, I need all the details. So in that same thinking, we're in March, mid-March. Where notices are going out. April's around the corner, May's coming. At what point are we going to sit down and look at priorities? At what point are you going to be able to tell us this is the percentage where we're at? Going back to the public comment earlier, we had that same question, right? And then how many people can we call back? What dollar amount is that? What's a priority? So if you can, just walk us however you can in terms of that timeline.
Sure, and that speaks to a transition that I'm welcoming. The last 5 weeks have been quite a challenge, and looking at the past and things that you have to kind of read a story about and not really get to be a part of it is hard, especially given what it means. Going forward is a lot more exciting and certainly a lot more empowering, not only for everyone in this room, but our community and our families, and I think our district staff, in terms of what is it that we recommend, what is it that we believe in, what is it that we know our kids need to have, and then the questions about need, want, and what we can afford become a part of that. In answering the question about the next steps, I honestly, in full transparency, want to get through today. And I want to get some sleep. And then what I'm excited about is looking at that timeline with cabinet and being able to start looking at the LCAP and starting to look at what the numbers are going to come from the governor and the legislature. And all that information, of course, is going to be happily shared. And I think even more transparency in terms of this budget and delivering it, because we know what it is up until this week. But going forward, we have to make sure that stays on track, or we're going to lose the momentum that we've built, and that's super important not to lose. So it'll be two activities, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah. I think it's really important that on this next step about building the budget, that our community is involved. Yeah, I really think that we need to have our HESTA and CSEA and our parents involved in not a big group, but a small enough group that can work together. Well, I don't want it too big because then it's unreal. But a small group that can work cohesively and look at the numbers and come up with goals. What is it that we want? And then, and this will give you time, allow you to get the time that you need to figure out, what we have, what we can spend on certain things, and have the cabinets, where we know what it's gonna cost, what programs are gonna cost, because you can sit and say all you want, but if we don't know what things cost, it's kind of a ridiculous time spent. And we've had budget meetings like that where we weren't prepared. The district wasn't prepared, and people, I want this, I want this, I want this, and then the district, well, no, we can't do this because it costs this. I'd rather come in with a community meeting where we know what things are going to cost, and then the community understands what our limitations, what we can afford. Let's be transparent that way. This is what we can afford. that's what I'd like to see. I don't know what the rest of the board feels, but I'd like to turn the dynamic that we bring in our community, but they need to know, this is where we're at. So we're not doing pie in the sky stuff.
Is that the LCAP process, or is that a different process?
That's part of the process.
Part of it.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's such an empowering, exciting thing to look forward to. And,
Yeah.
and something that we can do. And,
Yeah.
and instead of dwelling in all of this, we have to learn the lessons, we have to remember, but we also get a chance to write that next step.
Right.
So I
Write
think,
as in R-I-G, W-R-I-T-E, not the other.
Right.
You get a chance to do it, I'm sorry.
I think if I can add, that there are several things that we would need to do, and although they're all separate, they all intertwine to get to the same outcome. One, we've talked about the LCAP, that's one process that accounts for that 9-point-something million. With that, we also have to be sure, knowing that as of July 1, it's a new base year for us. We have to be proactive in a different manner to ensure that we make contact with all of our families and ensure that the eligibility forms are turned in. We also have to internally work on different processes and procedures that Mr. Bishop identified and explained on the February 15th meeting. We have some work to do inside of our house. We also have work to do as a team, as a governing team, to identify which kinds of priorities based on whether it is recommendations that we come to you or recommendations that the board comes up with in regards to budget priorities. We also have to, now that we know with certainty what our finances are in regards to second interim, engage the community, engage our families, engage our labor partners, because there is no question what our finances are. And moving forward, all of those things, and there's probably others that I'm not thinking about, are going to intertwine to help us build the budget in the spring for next school year. But it is a process, and we all have a piece to carry, and we will get there.
Yeah, I just, and I think that part of the criticism that we've received is that we weren't open enough. And it's a fair criticism. We just didn't have correct numbers to be open with, and now we do. And I feel comfortable being open and working with the numbers that we have now and being able to do what we can do. Anybody else have questions?
Mr. Wilmer, I think there was other people with questions.
I thought I didn't want to assume anything.
okay.
And I just want to, again, thank you and all the staff for the amount of work that I can just imagine took scrubbing the numbers line by line to ensure that what we have before us tonight is a much better reflection of where we are. Because we couldn't say with certainty what that was before.
There's a lot of eyes, a lot of support. I wanna
Right,
thank them.
and I know that the criticism was that, we made decisions based on unsure numbers. And so the thing is, now that we have the numbers before us and we know what we're ending the year with, based on, even just what you stated in your second interim report, the decrease of the 59.55 full-time certificated, classified, and management. It's not on there. So I just want to make sure we add management because we did reductions in all three groups. And I just want to say that in 2021, we had a total of 470 certificated, classified, and management positions. And in this school year, we increased to 597. That was 127 people we hired from 2020, 2021 to 21, 22. That was a lot. to also absorb in 1 year. And we're reducing by 59.55. So for the following 2 years, we are looking at 537.55 people that we're projecting. So it's, that we're projecting out to the two, yes, with the resolutions, with the layoffs. And again, and that's projecting what you're saying, you know, that we can meet our obligation. So again, going back to what we think is important as far as, we start with the percentage. What percentage of our budget do we want to dedicate to people that we can sustain and still be able to do programs? Because I've been in a district that's always been in the mid-80s. It's, regardless of the budget, they consistently stay within that realm. And if we get a little bit more funding, it's still within that realm. Why? Because we know we can sustain that. And again, I think that's what's important, is to start there as our foundation, as what percentage we want to dedicate our budget to staffing. Because I think moving forward, if we don't focus there on what we can sustain, because otherwise you're not going to be able to do the different programs and the different, you know, additions that you want to incorporate from year to year. But at least you know you can sustain what you have if you are at 55%, let's just say, or 57%. But creating a budget there and then building off of what our reserves, or I mean, what our assumptions are coming in as, right, when we're building our budgets, then you work from that. But it's working backwards in my mind, so that way we can manage, you know, our community and our staff in a way that is responsible and not inflating by 127 people and then not be able to sustain it.
Trustee Tosti? Trustee Marks?
I just want to thank you for all your hard work and for helping us understand where we're at now. And I'm grateful that we have some numbers that are solid and we can trust. It's been a difficult process, and now I'm looking forward to deciding the right way to continue to stay in a positive as much as possible with the bottom line.
And then I have two more. So I didn't realize, the admin number, do you happen to have that anywhere? And is there a reason why it's not in here of the?
I made a mistake in that they're included in the numbers,
Okay.
Yeah,
but
they
I
are.
consider myself a certificated employee.
Mhm.
And so I didn't make that designation because
Okay.
I think we're all contributing and doing those things. So
Thank you for
in the
clarifying.
future, I could change that, but they are included in it.
Okay, if they're included there, I think just clarifying that
Yeah.
they are, okay. And then the only other question I had was on the facilities piece. So what do you know about the state reimbursement monies that we've heard about over time that we were supposed to get? Have we received them? Do you know if we're going to receive them? Is that something we should still hope for? And when and if we do receive them, what's the plan to think about priorities or how to use it?
So the building part of our plans and futures, other than the slide and those funds, that's really where I've left it.
Okay.
I think going forward, we are on a list. We are on a list to receive some of those investments we made from not the last bond, but the previous bond. And I believe we're also in line for the investments we made from our last bond. When those funds come in, we have opportunities. I think more important, again, than the funds, it's going to be the plan. What's the facilities plan? What is it that we want to look at? Because that's the exciting part of this opportunity, is we know things are coming, instead of putting it in a supply or in a number somewhere. To have a plan, to know what we'd like to do, and to implement that plan is empowering. I'd like to get away from reacting. I think that Sanchez was really clear about what we've done is react to things. The only way we get ahead is, like you were mentioning earlier, with having a and this day it's this, and this day it's this, and set that plan in motion, and those opportunities are gonna come. And I think for us to not be reactionary is to start thinking that way. So I know facilities plan is already something we've looked at, and I know it's something we'll grow into, and far be it from me to pontificate from the front what I think it should be. I want to build it for the team and see what the plan is.
Thank you.
And I just want to go back to the contributions. So I found the restricted, the routine restricted maintenance is by ed code that we have to set that money aside. So we're obligated to do that. So it's just for my clarification. I just wanted to
I
make sure.
appreciate that. I was gonna go back and look at that because it's in an area of budget numbers and other
Yes.
codes that tie into things we
Right.
have to invest in.
Right.
But again, I'm gonna also be really careful as I grow in this position to do my homework too, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Are we okay?
Yes, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Do we have, so this is an action item for approval? Do we have any more, well, first, do we have a motion and then we can do discussion?
I make a motion that we approve the second interim and fiscal stabilization plan.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Discussion? I do have two things for us to consider. Well, I think one thing for sure, and Trustee Gris said this, but I think we should reiterate the importance of moving forward. And once we do, see what money we have or start looking at, priorities and really including our community and not just saying, but really, committing to that and community meaning, obviously, labor partners and our parents. Our parents have come here several times and said that they feel left out. And so, really being true to that, we've talked about having parent meetings at schools, right? This is that opportunity to really do that moving forward. It is, exciting is not the word I want to use. I think many people are still feeling the pain from the cuts, and we still don't know. And so I think I want us to be sensitive to that and understanding and figure out, okay, now we're here, it's better, how do we move forward? So it's just something I want to see if we can consider.
I think you're right, because I think the comment that was made was that the March 15th is what we had to, what was looming. And so we needed to make a decision because we couldn't go past that date without, and again, those are, they're just setting the timeline for what is needed to be cut. There's still so many more conversations that are going to happen between now and May that will finalize the process as to what we are wanting as a community, as a district, and as a community to keep, and what will need to go permanently. But that's still that's exactly what I would love to envision, as Jan said, a collaborative, focus on what that budget looks like from now to then, and working together with everyone to see what will stay and what will go permanently. What we
With
can
the
afford.
district being prepared. In other words, I want to see it where it's, we know what we can spend. That they have a good idea and of what we can spend on which things. I have been to too many meetings in this school district where we talk about ideas and we talk about goals, but then when it comes push to shove, there's no money. And I don't want to see it that way, because then we've just spun our wheels.
Well, that's what we did. That's what happened.
And so let's not spin our wheels.
Yeah. Okay. Any other discussion on?
I think we should also start thinking about the meetings that we want to have with our parents at the school sites, maybe get that calendar going.
That is on my mind as well. I thought we established a preliminary.
We did.
And so, yeah, I'd like to solidify that.
I'll get going on
All
that.
right. So we had a motion, a second. Any other discussion? Are we ready to call for the vote?
Yep.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, 5-0. Next, agenda item is the, hold on, is 9B, discussion and approval of a contract amendment between Superintendent Erica Sanchez and Hollister School District for unpaid furlough days.
Okay, so good evening, Board of Trustees, fellow cabinet members, and the members of the public. Item 9B is an item that I am requesting for the board to consider tonight. The actual agreement itself would indicate that both parties, one being myself as the employee, and two being the board, the governing board as my employers, are willing to waive certain clauses in the contract that currently exists between the superintendent, myself, and the board. With that, I would like to request tonight that in light of all that has taken place, that quite simply the board consider to approve a amount of furlough days equivalent to 5 days in regards to my position, and that be a mechanism that we as a team discuss tonight, and in regards to my position and myself as the leader, acknowledging and knowing the structural needs for making certain changes within our budget. Sometimes in situations, less is more. If you have specific questions, I'm more than happy to ask. There's a single sheet attached to this board item, which includes an agreement between yourselves and me to enact and ensure that these furlough days take place for this current school year.
Thank you. Any questions for Superintendent Sanchez?
So this will reflect on this budget.
This will reflect moving forward, should it be approved. It would reflect in this fiscal year's budget moving forward.
I didn't see the dollar amount. Do we have an approximate?
The dollar amount would be equivalent to just 5 days of my per diem pay.
And to the question earlier, so how does that work? I don't know, with the second interim budget already approved, how would that be worked in?
So second interim, again, is a snapshot moment in time. And if we think back, it would not be reflected in second interim, because second interim reflects expenditures from November 1st to January 31st. So moving forward, because we're in mid-March, that is when a savings would be reflected to the district.
It'll also be reflected in the unaudited actuals in September.
Other questions, comments?
I just, and I know when you gave us a heads up that you wanted to do this, and it isn't something that anybody asked, it is, because I know what has happened within the last 2 weeks has weighed heavily on everyone.
Absolutely.
And, we as a board don't work for the Hollister School District, but, so there's really nothing that we financially could give if we could. But as part of this leadership team, you being the head of this district, and willingly wanting to make a sacrifice for everyone, for the organization, means a lot, because it is an example of your leadership, and I want to recognize that and commend you, and thank you.
Well said.
I also want to commend you. I think that's an amazingly great idea, and I know it comes from the heart, and we greatly appreciate it.
I agree, ditto. I've thought about it. It is a sign, I feel, of acknowledging a personal responsibility and of showing a willingness to sacrifice a bit of your salary and pay. I know it won't add up to near as much as we've already had to sacrifice, but I'd like to hope that it ends up being recognized as the fact that you are trying to show that you're willing to sacrifice as well. And so thank you for that.
Okay, thank you for leading by example.
Yeah.
Superintendent Sanchez, I mean, I think that's something, it was in a resolution that we asked for, in the resolution last week, right, that we wanted people to consider, and so this is your way to lead by example. Thank you. So do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion that we approve the amendment number 1 to the employment contract between Erica Sanchez, Superintendent, and the Governing Board of the Hollister School District.
Is there a second?
I second.
Discussion? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, 5-0, thank you. And we'll go ahead, oh, do we have a motion to convene to closed session?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, closed session. Thank you for those of you who came today.
Yes, thank you.